In May 2022, I was giving a lecture at the Architecture Association in London, and Patrick Schumacher of Zahedid Architects happened to be in the audience. At one point, I asked the question, I wonder when architects will eventually wake up to the possibilities of AI, and what will be the trigger? And Patrick quipped from the audience, it's already happened. We've already woken up to the possibilities of AI. And unbeknownst to me, or indeed many others in the architectural community, Zahedid Architects had been collaborating with Refik Anadol on an early version of DALL-E 2. At that point, DALL-E 2 had not been released to the public, and only experts such as Refik Anadol had been given access to the platform. And the results, as you can see, are quite remarkable. This was very much a revolution, or an enormous change in standards in terms of the production of AI images. One of the first images to come out was an image of an astronaut on the horse. The way that DALL-E 2, along with Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, and all these other diffusion models operate is through the logic of the prompt. You write a prompt, and then Midjourney, DALL-E, whatever, will then generate an image, a series of images, based on that prompt. Now, as you can see from this, the prompt is an astronaut on a horse. Now, at no point, I can imagine there's probably never been an astronaut who has ridden a horse like this. Still less a photograph of it. But what's happening here is that DALL-E is searching and synthesizing an image of what it would have been like had an astronaut ridden a horse. The point here is that a lot of people think that AI copies. It doesn't copy. It does something very different. It searches and synthesizes. Indeed, I myself have been through an exercise generating something like 5,000 different images based on Mies van der Rohe's Barcelona Pavilion, and none of those images, not one single one, was identical to the original building that I was referring to. What is also happening here is that a very different process to a GAN. We know that a GAN is a very long-winded and laborious process to train a GAN to produce an image. The images also were quite low resolution, and you needed to be quite a computational expert to be able to produce them. All that began to change with these diffusion models. They're based on massive pre-trained neural networks that you can access and adopt. They're generic pre-trained models. They're not designed necessarily for architects, but they're generic models, but you can use them for architecture. What's more, you haven't got to be a computational expert. Anyone can do this. And you can incorporate different aspects of the design, such as rendering or lighting conditions and so on, by simply referring to them, not having to be an expert on rendering. And thirdly, these are done very, very quickly to a high resolution. They are definitely superior to the work that we produced in GANs. Moreover, they operate in a very different way. It's not two neural networks competing against one another as you get with a GAN. Rather, it's operating through a form of by taking some Gaussian noise based on a Markov chain that disrupts an image. And as that image is being repaired, it generates something novel. So it's a very, very different process, but producing a far superior outcome. And this, of course, became something of a game changer in terms of AI-generated images. Here you can see that the sort of the sense of materiality, the sense of three-dimensionality is far superior to the previous GAN. In fact, we put together the first ever, what I believe, the first ever GAN-generated image design produced, done by Refik Anadol, plus the first of these DALL-E ones. You can see, also produced by Refik Anadol, you can see the difference in the quality. So what can happen then is that the Office of Zahedid Architects can generate images that look very much as though they were designed by Zaha herself, but also other people can. By putting Zaha Hadid in the prompt, for example, you can generate an image that looks quite realistically like the work of Zaha. In fact, if you go onto Instagram, and here you can see my Instagram account, NeilLeach14, but if you go onto Instagram, you can see people posting all their work, and some of the work is truly, truly remarkable. I recommend that everybody signs up for Instagram and tracks some of the work that is being produced. And what's interesting about this is that it opens up a range of possibilities that you would otherwise not have thought about. Here you can see something, a building in the desert that is really quite extraordinary. I would never have thought about it. And gradually also, as these versions improve, as we go to more advanced versions, in this case Midjourney, you can see much better resolution. Another aspect, a bit of advice that I'd offer is to try and include something in the prompt that effectively opens up the possibilities, allows you to extrapolate. In this case, I use the term orchid. Orchid plus stool, we get an orchid stool. Or in this case, I used actually a frog from the Amazon that has interesting markings on its back, and it produces this building with interesting markings. And so all of a sudden, a new arena opened up of really highly convincing images that sometimes people mistake for photographs or actual renderings. To me, the challenge is to produce something that you don't even have to do any post-production work on, to Photoshop or anything, but simply to use it as it is. But getting the prompt right is really quite a challenge. We all have to become prompt engineers in this new world. So what exactly is happening? How can we analyze this process? Clearly, the outcomes are quite remarkable. They are opening up possibilities, suggesting things we otherwise would not have thought about. Indeed, Patrick Schumacher refers to this process as one of ideation, of brainstorming ideas, and in their office, they often use Midjourney, DALL-E, and Stable Diffusion to brainstorm ideas in a competition. And for sure, it does come up with things that we would otherwise have never thought about. There are many people who are doing this. If you go onto Instagram, you can find, for example, this guy is called Midjourney Architect, and he's every evening he is generating several different designs for buildings, which is quite extraordinary form of production. And this is the work of Carlos Bannon, who is using ControlNet, bringing other software to bear to engage with the diffusion models to produce something interesting. ControlNet allows him to control the outcomes more precisely. So what exactly is happening? This, of course, is the model of the GAN. We have on the left-hand side the generator, one neural network. On the right-hand side, we have the discriminator, another neural network. And this is how a GAN operates. Now, a diffusion model, as I mentioned, operates in a very different way. It's not based on these two different neural networks. But I think this diagram helps to really clarify, to my mind, what is going on in this process. Now, human beings, I would claim, are very, very good discriminators. We can tell almost immediately whether we like a perfume just by smelling it, whether we like a cocktail just by sipping it. And also with images, we have an extremely quick response to that. But I would argue, by comparison, we're not as good generators as we would like to think we are. Now, what is happening with these images being generated by these diffusion models is that they are increasing the range of options. They are expanding our capacity to be a generator. They're becoming like a prosthesis to the human imagination. And then we're using our very strong capacity to discriminate in order to choose and select which ones we want. That, I think, is the real strength of these models. In other words, someone using a diffusion model has a huge advantage over someone who is not using one. And of course, they always say that in the office of the future, those using AI will replace those who don't use AI.